It all started when a single question quietly spread across social media and then exploded everywhere. Is TD Jakes officially arrested? People did not hear it from a court statement or a police report. They heard it from whispers, viral posts, and dramatic videos that moved faster than facts. You won't believe how quickly the rumor took control of the internet. Within hours, thousands of people were sharing clips, screenshots, and bold claims, all pointing fingers at one of the most powerful pastors in America. For many, it felt unreal. For others, it felt like something they had secretly expected. And just like that, a man known for preaching faith and discipline was pulled into a storm of suspicion. Let me tell you, this did not happen in isolation. The rumor did not appear out of thin air. It was fueled by confusion, silence, and a series of troubling stories that had already placed TD Jakes under quiet scrutiny. People began connecting dots, even when those dots were not clearly visible. Some posts claimed there had been a secret arrest. Others said powerful people were trying to keep things hidden. No official record ever confirmed an arrest, but the damage was already done. Once doubt entered the conversation, it refused to leave. This is how the narrative changed. The discussion stopped being about truth and started becoming about trust. For decades, TD Jakes had built an image of strength, morality, and spiritual authority. He was not just a pastor, he was a brand, a leader, and a voice people followed without question. So when rumors challenged that image, the reaction was intense. Supporters rushed to defend him, saying it was all lies. Critics said silence was proof of guilt. And in the middle were millions of confused followers wondering what to believe. But here is the shocking part. While people were focused on arrest rumors, another story quietly resurfaced and added fuel to the fire. His son, Jermaine Jakes, had previously made headlines for a legal incident that shocked many. According to public reports, Jermaine had been arrested during a sting operation in Dallas for indecent exposure. Though he was later released and the case was legally separate from his father, the timing was devastating. The internet did what it always did. It merged two different stories into one powerful narrative. This is where it gets interesting, because TD Jakes had spent years speaking strongly against certain behaviors. He had preached about morality, discipline, and accountability from the pulpit. Yet, here was his own family facing a public scandal that seemed to stand in direct contrast to those messages. People were not just judging the son, they were judging the father. They asked whether a man who guided millions could truly lead his own household without controversy. The debate grew louder by the day. Some argued that a father should not be blamed for his adult son's mistakes. Others said leadership started at home. Social media platforms turned into courtrooms where everyone acted as judge and jury. Clips of old sermons were reposted with sarcastic captions. Comment sections filled with anger, disappointment, and confusion. Faith communities felt divided, and even those who had never followed TD Jakes closely were now paying attention. What makes this story different? It was not just about one mistake or one rumor. It was about layers. Every time people thought the story had reached its peak, another detail surfaced and twisted the narrative further. Questions began spreading faster than answers. Why was there no clear statement addressing everything at once? Why were former associates suddenly speaking up? And why did this all feel connected even when facts remained unclear? Then came the emotional shift. People started saying the situation felt familiar. They compared it to other fallen leaders who once seemed untouchable. They remembered how admiration often turned into disbelief and disbelief turned into betrayal. The tone online changed from curiosity to suspicion. Even neutral observers admitted something felt off, not because of confirmed crimes, but because of how quickly the image of perfection cracked. The craziest part was how silence played a role. Every day, without a direct response, allowed speculation to grow. Videos claiming insider knowledge went viral. Anonymous accounts claimed there was more coming. Some said investigations were already happening behind closed doors. Others said powerful connections were protecting reputations. No proof was shown, but fear does not need proof to spread. It only needs uncertainty. As the noise grew louder, people began to wonder if this was just the beginning. Many felt the story was building towards something bigger, something that would finally explain why so many troubling pieces were falling into place at once. It no longer felt like a simple rumor. It felt like a setup for a revelation that had not yet arrived. As the noise around the rumors refused to die down, another layer of the story slowly forced its way into the spotlight. This time, it did not come from strangers on social media, but from people who once stood close to TD Jakes himself. You won't believe how quickly the conversation shifted from outside speculation to deeply personal claims. What had started as whispers about arrests and family controversy suddenly turned into something far more serious and unsettling. Let me tell you, this moment changed everything. Former mentees began speaking out, and one name echoed louder than the rest: Manasseh Jordan. He was not a random critic or internet troll. He was someone who once looked up to T.D. Jakes as a spiritual guide, someone who trusted him, someone who believed he was safe under his mentorship. When Jordan came forward, his words carried weight, and the internet leaned in closer than ever before. This is how the story took a darker turn. Jordan claimed that during his younger years, his relationship with T.D. Jakes crossed boundaries that should never be crossed. He described moments that made him uncomfortable, confused, and afraid. Moments where trust was slowly replaced with control. According to him, it was not loud or obvious at first. It was quiet, subtle, and hidden behind spiritual authority. That detail alone disturbed many listeners because it suggested something planned, not accidental. But here is the shocking part. Jordan said he was not alone. He revealed that after sharing his story publicly, other individuals reached out to him privately. They claimed they had experienced similar situations, different times, different places, but the same pattern, the same fear, the same confusion. These were not dramatic accusations filled with rage. They were calm, emotional accounts from people who said they had carried this pain silently for years. This is where it gets interesting because Jordan explained that the alleged behavior was not physical violence in the way people usually imagine. Instead, he described grooming, manipulation, and the misuse of spiritual power. He said trust was built slowly, then used against him. He spoke about feeling pressured to stay quiet because of fear, shame, and the belief that no one would believe him if he spoke against such a powerful figure. As his videos spread, viewers noticed his tone. He did not sound rehearsed. He did not sound like someone chasing attention. He sounded tired, broken. At times, it felt like he was struggling just to finish his sentences. That raw emotion made people uncomfortable, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt real. Comments flooded in from viewers saying they felt his pain through the screen. What makes this story different? Jordan did not frame his claims as an attack. He framed them as a release. He said carrying the truth had affected his mental health, his confidence, and his faith. He explained that the hardest part was not what allegedly happened, but living with the silence afterward. For many viewers, this shifted the conversation from gossip to something far more serious. The reaction was immediate and divided. Supporters of T.D. Jakes dismissed the claims as lies and attention-seeking. Others demanded investigations and accountability. Many people felt torn. They wanted to believe the pastor they admired, but they could not ignore the pain in Jordan's voice. The internet became a battlefield, with faith on one side and skepticism on the other. The craziest part was how quickly the story expanded. More names were mentioned. More screenshots appeared. More anonymous accounts claimed they had stories, but were afraid to speak publicly. Even without official investigations announced, the pressure was growing. People began asking whether this would finally lead to legal action or whether it would fade away like so many other allegations before it. As the tension continued to rise, the focus slowly shifted again. People began to ask what would happen if these claims moved beyond social media. What if lawyers got involved? What if courts demanded answers instead of comment sections? The possibility alone was enough to shake the foundation of everything TD Jakes had built. And just as the public tried to process these allegations, another question began forming in the background. How would this affect his ministry, his followers, and his powerful connections outside the church? Destiny took an unexpected turn, and the next chapter of this controversy was no longer just about accusations, but about consequences that could not be ignored. As allegations continued to spread, the conversation slowly moved away from emotions and into something far more serious. People were no longer just reacting with shock or disbelief, they were asking what could happen next. You won't believe how quickly the tone shifted from online debates to real-world consequences. The story was no longer living only on social media, it was now knocking on the doors of the legal system. Let me tell you, this was the moment when everything started to feel heavy. Reports began circulating that potential victims were considering legal action. Lawyers were allegedly being contacted. Conversations that once happened in private messages were now being discussed in public spaces. Even though no official charges against TD Jakes had been announced, the idea that lawsuits could be coming changed the entire atmosphere. Allegations suddenly felt closer to becoming investigations. This is how pressure began to build. Legal experts and commentators online started explaining what could happen if formal complaints were filed. They talked about how long investigations could take, how evidence would be reviewed, and how powerful figures often faced intense scrutiny once the legal process began. For many viewers, this was the first time they realized the situation might not simply disappear. But here's the shocking part. The silence from TD Jakes and his ministry became louder than any statement. There was no detailed response addressing all the claims at once. No long explanation, no clear timeline. That absence allowed speculation to grow. Supporters said he was staying quiet to avoid feeding rumors. Critics said the silence felt strategic. And in the middle were followers who felt confused and abandoned. This is where it gets interesting because people started connecting the dots between the allegations and the earlier scandals. The arrest rumors, his son's legal trouble, the claims from former mentees, all of it began to feel connected in the public's mind, even if legally it was not. The story was no longer about individual events. It was about a pattern that people believed they were seeing unfold. Public trust began to crack. Congregants questioned leadership. Some followers said they were taking a break from attending church. Others defended TD Jakes more fiercely than ever, saying attacks against spiritual leaders were nothing new. The divide grew deeper and emotions ran high. Faith communities that once felt united now felt tense and uncertain. What makes this story different? It was not being driven by mainstream media alone. Much of the pressure came from everyday people demanding answers. Survivors of other scandals shared their own experiences, saying they recognized the same signs. They warned others not to ignore red flags just because someone held power or respect. The craziest part was how quickly perception began to reshape reality. Even without confirmed legal action, TD Jakes' image had already changed for many people. A man once seen as untouchable was now being viewed through a lens of suspicion. Every old interview, sermon, and public appearance was re-examined. Words that once inspired were now questioned. As days passed, the weight of uncertainty grew heavier. People started to realize that regardless of the final outcome, things would never go back to the way they were. The trust, once broken, would be hard to rebuild. And while some still hoped for clarity and truth, others prepared themselves for the possibility of more revelations. Just when it seemed the controversy had reached its most serious point, attention shifted once again. This time it moved beyond the church and into a world that raised even more uncomfortable questions. Destiny took an unexpected turn, and the next part of the story would challenge not only faith, but judgment, influence, and power. As the pressure continued to rise, the story took one last turn that no one could ignore. Attention slowly shifted away from churches and courtrooms and moved into a completely different space. You won't believe how this part of the story changed the way people looked at everything that came before it. T.D. Jakes was no longer being discussed only as a pastor. He was now being examined as a public figure with powerful connections beyond the pulpit. Let me tell you, for years, T.D. Jakes had been known for his influence in media and entertainment. He had shared stages, events, and private gatherings with celebrities, musicians, and powerful figures in the industry. At one time, these connections were praised. People said he was bringing faith into places where it did not usually exist. But after the controversies, those same connections started to look very different. This is how suspicion grew stronger. Old photos, videos, and event appearances resurfaced online. People pointed to reports claiming he had attended high-profile parties with famous entertainers, including figures from the hip-hop world. These were not church events. They were late-night gatherings described by insiders as wild and far from spiritual. While no illegal activity was proven, the optics alone were enough to shake public confidence. But here is the shocking part. Critics argued that a man who preached strict moral values should not be comfortable in environments filled with behavior he openly criticized. Supporters pushed back, saying he was there to mentor and guide, not participate. Still, the timing made everything worse. With allegations already hanging in the air, these stories felt like confirmation to those who already doubted him. This is where it gets interesting because the conversation stopped being about facts and started being about character. People asked whether faith and fame could truly exist together without corruption. They questioned whether power slowly changed even the most respected leaders. The image T.D. Jakes had built over decades now felt fragile, as if one more revelation could cause it to collapse. Social media became relentless. Some followers publicly stepped away from his ministry, saying they needed clarity before they could trust again. Others stood firm, calling the entire situation a coordinated attack meant to destroy a Black religious leader. The divide was deep, emotional, and personal. Families argued, churches split. Faith itself was questioned. What makes this story different? It was never confirmed by one single event. It was shaped by layers of rumors, allegations, silence, and perception. No arrest was officially announced. No court had delivered a final judgment. Yet, the impact was real. Reputation damage did not wait for verdicts. It moved faster than truth ever could. The craziest part was realizing that the story no longer belonged to T.D. Jakes alone. It belonged to the people who followed him, defended him, doubted him, and felt betrayed by the possibility that someone they trusted might not be who they believed. Even those who still supported him admitted something had changed forever. In the end, people were left with questions instead of answers. Was this the fall of a powerful leader or the result of unchecked rumors? Were these allegations the beginning of accountability or another example of public judgment without proof? No one knew for sure. What was clear was that the image of T.D. Jakes had been permanently altered. And as the noise slowly faded, one truth remained. Faith, once shaken, is never easily restored. Destiny took an unexpected turn, and whether this story ended in redemption or ruin, it had already rewritten the legacy of a man who once stood beyond question.